Hi and welcome to VCSP how-to videos. In this video, the topic is adding a VMware CDP proxy, which is a core component for replicating virtual machines on VMware with a near zero RPO. Let's have a quick look at the different architectures. Now, our core components are the backup server, the source and the target clusters, and the CDP proxies. So in this example, we can see two regular VMware vSphere clusters. Now, these could be located in the same data center, or one could be in one data center and another one could be in a remote data center. So the point is that each cluster has at least one VMware CDP proxy as close as possible next to it, right? So one closest to the source and one closest to the target. Now, in the next architecture, so what changes here is we add Veeam Cloud Connect, right? So meaning that on the left side, we have a client side, and on the right, we have the service provider side. So everything past the cloud gateway, which is in the middle, right? On the right is the service provider side. So this side on the right will act as the disaster recovery side for the customer. So here what happens is that the service provider allocates compute, storage and network resources to the tenant and then provides them through the means of a hardware plan. The tenant then goes to the backup server on the top left and it registers with the service provider. Then afterwards, the tenant can create CDP policies targeted at this cloud host. And this cloud host actually represents the hardware plan resources previously defined by the service provider. As you can see, this scenario is pretty similar to the regular snapshot-based replication with Veeam Cloud Connect. So the entire setup is almost the same, except that we are installing I/O filters on the target and the source cluster, and that instead of a regular VMware backup proxy, we have a CDP proxy. In this architecture, we also have Veeam Cloud Connect, but instead of using VMware vSphere, we're also using VMware Cloud Director. So here, the service provider allocates the compute, storage, and network resources to the tenant and provides them through the means of a virtual data center or VDC. So everything in this case is configured through VMware Cloud Director. So the tenant then registers on their backup server with the service provider, and they can create CDP policies targeted at the cloud host. Again, the cloud host in this case represents the remote VDC resources previously defined by the service provider. So again, pretty similar setup as with the Cloud Connect replication in terms of vCloud Director. Now, one difference is that to be able to use the organization VDCs for CDP, you must install the I/O filter on each VDC where VApps reside. After you install the I/O filter on the organization's VDCs, Veeam Backup and Replication will automatically install the filter on all underlying clusters and hosts. All right? So CDP proxy itself, what is it? It's another component, it's another role. So it can be a virtual or a physical machine. It can be either Windows or Linux operating system. What is important is that you can't just add a CDP proxy. You must first add a VMware vCenter or a VMware Cloud Director server to the backup infrastructure. Makes sense. Highly recommended is to have a fast network between the hosts and the CDP proxies, right? Because you're going to have a constant flow of data that needs to be replicated from source to target. So fast network is definitely recommended. You also need to open specific port range. So for example, for the host traffic between the ESXi and the CDP proxies, and also between the proxies themselves, right? So between the source proxy and the target proxy or proxies. But For a full list of requirements, better check the system requirements section in the user guide. Now, the source proxy. So the source proxy, right, on the source side, aggregates all of the changes that come in and stores these changes in the RAM, processes them, and sends them to the target proxy, right? It's also this proxy that will compress the data, encrypt the data, and this server can be either physical or virtual, as mentioned earlier, right? Yes, first the data is stored in the RAM, and optionally also a disk cache can be used in case we run out of memory. Now the target proxy obviously receives the data from the source proxy, also decrypts, decompresses all the traffic, and passes on to the VMware cluster. Again, receives all the data, stores it into RAM. If RAM is full, this cache is being used, and it can be physical or virtual. Then services and components. So we have several lightweight services that just take a few seconds to deploy on each of the proxies. Deployment is also fully automated. It's Veeam Backup and Replication that will install these components and services. So what is actually installed? First of all, we have the installer service and the data mover, and then we also have the CDP proxy service. So the CDP proxy service is the one that manages everything related into CDP, right? Everything we discussed before: data aggregation, data compression, decompression, transfer, etc. The installer service actually looks at the components, installs them, and upgrades the necessary components and services based for this server. Then the Veeam data mover, that's actually the one that handles the traffic during the failback. Next, RAM and cache. So by default, all of the data is stored into the RAM, right? So the proxy receives the data and stores everything into the RAM. Now, if the RAM memory is less or equal to 16 gigabytes, the CDP proxy will use 50% of the memory for the operating system and 50% for data processing. Now, if RAM is larger than 16 gigabytes on the proxy, then the CDP proxy will use 8 gigabytes for the operating system and all the rest, all the other RAM, for data processing. The CDP proxy also always allocates at least 1 megabyte of RAM for each process disk. This is kind of a protective mechanism just to make sure that the processing will not stop even if some disks produce too much data and cannot be processed on time. So if a CDP proxy runs out of memory and cannot allocate any space in memory, then the proxy starts storing data in the cache, which means on disk, right? Which probably will be slower. Now, if both cache and RAM are full, well, then there is no free CDP proxy, for example, then it will use the protective mechanism. Otherwise, it will just switch to another available CDP proxy. Data is also deleted from the cache and memory only after the proxy gets a notification that the target host has successfully received the saved data sent by the proxy, right? Because we use TCP, so hereby we can also guarantee the data delivery. So, adding the VMware CDP proxy itself, it's a very simple process. If you already have added a regular VMware backup proxy, then actually there is not much different to it. You just choose a server, you specify the traffic ports or go with the default ports. You configure the cache, so that's the disk cache that you need to have on the local machine, right? So that could be just by default, it's 10 gigabytes. You can optionally specify some traffic rules, whether you want traffic encrypted, etc., or throttled. Then you review the settings and it will be added to the infrastructure. Now, let's go into the lab. Let's have a demo and see how we can add the CDP proxy in Veeam Backup and Replication. So let's have a look at the console. So Here we can see the Veeam Backup in our application console. We go to Backup Infrastructure and Backup Proxies. Now let's right click and add a proxy. Select VMware CDP Proxy. And then we can choose the server we want to add. Now this requires that you've already added the Windows or Linux or virtual or physical machine earlier on. So this is what we've done in our case. Let's just select and then we can create, let's say this is a CDP source proxy. You also see the ports that are going to be used. So this is the host traffic port to communicate between the ESXi host and the CDP proxy server. And then we have the proxy traffic port, which is the communication port between source and target CDP proxy servers. So we hit next, and then we need to specify the path. So here we need to specify where we are going to store the cache. So when we run out of memory, then we will start using the cache on disk. So let's just here use the default 10 gigabyte, click on next. It will come up with a warning that I don't have enough free space. This is fine in this lab. So we hit next. In case you want to apply any traffic rules like throttling, encryption, this is the place where you can set it. Otherwise, we will review. We will install the CDP component and hit apply. So this will then take a couple of seconds and it will install the package, restart the service, and we're good to go. So there we go. That went pretty fast. Finish. And now we see that next to the other proxies, we also have a CDP proxy server. Now, this process can be repeated for as many proxies as you want. So this is the exact same way you would add a source proxy or a target proxy. And in case of Cloud Connect, then obviously you would run through the wizard on the customer backup server, add the source CDP proxies there, and on the service provider backup server, that's where you would add the target proxies, right? The process is identical, so there's nothing special on that part. So this is it. Thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day.